Hey friends, I'm with Bill Salier. Hey Bill.
Hey Ray, how are you?
Good. Now you're principal of YouthWorks.
That's right, YouthWorks
And
College.
YouthWorks is what? College is what?
YouthWorks College is a training college for youth and children's workers. So
Excellent.
we train people for working churches, chaplains and schools.
Terrific. Now Bill, you've done a lot of study on John's Gospel. And we're going to study John's Gospel part 2 in first term. So looking forward to it. So thanks for saying yes.
That's all right, pleasure. Yeah.
Now Bill, firstly, what's the purpose of John's Gospel?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. In John is really clear about his purpose. John 20, 30, 31. He says, many have written these signs, but these are written in order that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. Yeah. So some of the other Gospels you've got to hunt around a bit and kind of work out what they're trying to get at. But John's clear and upfront. He wants us to understand who Jesus is so that we might believe in him and have eternal life.
Clear as a bell.
Clear as a bell, yep.
They often divide John's Gospel into book of signs, book of glory. Why do they do that? Like, what's the significance of that?
Yeah, one of the people often talk about John and the synoptics. So you've got Matthew, Mark,
Matthew,
Mark, and Luke.
Yeah.
Okay, they see things with a one view, and it's almost a bit like when you write an essay. Sometimes you can tell someone's used someone else's work. So it looks like Matthew and Luke have really heavily used Mark in writing it, but John kind of stands off on his own, and he's different in a lot of ways. Now, one of the key differences is that when it comes to the miracles of Jesus, John calls them signs. He doesn't call them works of power. Matthew, Mark and Luke call them works of power. John calls them signs. People think there's 7, maybe 8 signs, 6 depending on how you count them. But they all tend to occur in the first half of the Gospel, John 1 to 12, so it gets called the book of signs. Right. In the second half of the Gospel, Jesus returns to the Father, to the glory that he once had, and so it's called the book of glory. Right. But it's kind of, it's true, but it's not really adequate, because I think the death and resurrection is a sign. Yeah. So you get the major sign in the second half of the Gospel.
And there's glory.
And all the signs show Jesus' glory. So it's kind of one of those convenient things that you'll often read, but it reveals, it hides as much as it reveals.
We'll blame you academics for that.
That's right.
Now, we're going to start in chapter 12, which is actually the end of the first section, which picks up on the resurrection of Lazarus. He's now raised, sitting at the table. Just walk us through chapter 12.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because some people, traditionally the Gospel's divided into 1 to 12 and 13 to 21, but there are a few people that would see the second half of the Gospel actually starts with the resurrection of Lazarus, which kind of forms, if you think about it, you've got the resurrection of Lazarus and then you've got the resurrection of Jesus at the other end.
They bracket it.
So they bracket. And there's a few hints in the resurrection of Lazarus. There's grave clothes and stuff like that which appear there. Anyway, but most people see 12. I guess the academics would call it a hinge, which means you don't know whether it belongs with the first half or the second half. Right. So you call it a hinge because it's there.
Carpenters call it a hinge as well.
That's right. Okay, it joins the two things. But 12 is really important because all through the first half of the Gospel, there's been reference to this thing called the hour. And so you might remember back in chapter 2, Jesus is at the wedding at Cana. Mary asks him to do something, or his mother asks him to do something, and he says, my hour has not yet come. Right. And that hour doesn't come in chapter 7, and there's a couple of other places where it doesn't come. John chapter 12, the hour comes. Yeah. And so I think what that tells you is that John 13 to 21, or everything from 12 forward, is the hour. Right. And it's a really important hour. It's an hour when all sorts of stuff is going to happen, when Jesus' glory is going to be revealed, when true worship will be made possible. All these clues in the first half of the Gospel lead up to this point, and some Greeks come and see Jesus in 12, and Jesus says, now my hour has come. And so it's kind of game on for the rest of the Gospel as this timetable is put into action.
Now he talks about his death being like a seed. That must, unpack that?
Yeah, it's interesting because in the context of this hour, he talks, I'm going to be lifted up, which is ambiguous, but lifted up in those days could mean lifted up in glory, like we do at the end of a footy game, lift everyone up on the shoulders, or in that context, lifted up on the cross. Now, John combines those two ideas. He sees the lifting up on the cross as a moment of glory. And Jesus takes the opportunity in talking about that to explain a few clues about what his death is going to occur. And so the first one is it's going to be a moment of glory. The second one, as you said, he's going to be like a seed that drops into the earth and dies and produces much fruit. So it's going to be a fruit-bearing death. But then he also says that his death is going to be the end of the prince of this world. So you've read John Stott's book on the cross of Christ. Talks about the three kind of views of Jesus' death, the atonement. John has all three of those. So he's got this idea of Jesus ruling over the powers, dying in the place of others so they might live. And we'll see in chapter 13, he also dies as an example for us of what it means to live sacrificially.
Beautiful. Well, that's where we're going to leave it this week. And thanks, Bill, as we look forward to next week. But guys, have a great growth group and a great start to the new year. Thanks for serving God's people.